hard to believe we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of Tears of the Kingdom. A year later, and I'm still finding videos of new builds and crazy ideas from fans of the game showing its staying power. While the mechanics were certainly revolutionary, especially with how well they functioned on a Switch no less, another thing that really made the game special was the music. Now that we've reached the 1-year anniversary of Tears of the Kingdom, I've decided to still not talk about the music in that game. However, I do want to talk about a spin-off game whose soundtrack has not gotten the recognition it deserves, and that game is Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity. As a spin-off game from the Zelda franchise, Age of Calamity shares a lot of the same memorable themes, but also has some really cool original music. For instance, the menu music features an original theme that is used throughout the gameplay in many different contexts. And the menu music itself will change depending on where you are in the game's story. For instance, when you first start the game, the music has a mournful yet hopeful undertone to it. Once Calamity Ganon returns, the music changes to a mellower, fearful sort of state. And eventually, if you beat the game, there is a subtle triumph to it, almost like breathing a sigh of relief. The uses of this original melody could be a whole video unto itself. Today, however, I want to focus on how some of the Breath of the Wild music is used in Age of Calamity. Since there are so many instances of thematic crossover, this video looks specifically at how some of Breath of the Wild's battle themes are used. Age of Calamity is a Zelda game in many respects, but unlike the action-adventure mainline games, it falls into the hack-and-slash genre, which basically means there is only combat, whereas the main Zelda games feature much more exploration and puzzles and such, in addition to combat. The visuals of character designs and locations in Age of Calamity help to remind the player that we are in fact in Hyrule despite the different gameplay. Furthermore, the use of music specific to Breath of the Wild and across the Zelda franchise works together with these visuals to draw the player into the world of Hyrule. While there are many themes from other Zelda games present in Age of Calamity, they are for the most part presented differently because of the fundamentally different moods of the games. As a more battle-heavy game, the music for each level in Age of Calamity tends to have denser orchestration, which is very different from Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild's sound designer Hajime Wakai shares in an interview that him and the rest of the composition team stopped using the phrase world background music, replacing it instead with environmental background music, with the desire to combine the environmental noise and the music to create a truly immersive environment in Breath of the Wild. As such, the overworld music in Breath of the Wild is incredibly sparse to illuminate the openness of the world and the loneliness of Link. Wakai also speaks of the use of piano in Breath of the Wild. Piano is an instrument that had not been used much in the series before, but he felt it helped capture the large open-world concept of the new game. As such a versatile instrument, the piano can capture both sparsity and density quite well, and the composers connect the Breath of the Wild and Age of Calamity scores through the use of piano, although the Age of Calamity score certainly focuses more on the forte side of the instrument rather than the piano side. Although this scarcity is present in the overworld in Breath of the Wild, there are of course many times the music is denser, one of which being during combat. Still, even the music design for battle in Breath of the Wild varies in some interesting ways in Age of Calamity. The most common combat music in Breath of the Wild, in terms of amount of times you'll hear it on your travels, is the field battle music. Field battle basically has 3 parts to it, each one building on the last, culminating in a very frantic-sounding mess. Part 1 of Field Battle defies traditional description. It's an introductory sort of thing with some mallet percussion, light strings and piano, and this weird noise that sounds kind of like turning on a walkie-talkie or a brief TV static or something of the like. If you played Breath of the Wild for any length of time, it's probably familiar to you, but here it is anyways. This part 1 builds into part 2, which is more rhythmically steady, with a couple simple motifs traded between the brass and strings, while the piano plays a repeating figure in the background. It still sounds frantic and chaotic, but in a more contained way than part 1. Depending on the length of the battle, the music may stop here. If the battle continues, however, we get into a part 3. This is the steadiest of the parts, in the sense that more instruments are playing together instead of trading ideas back and forth, although it still features a lot of syncopation and roughly the same orchestration as part 2. In the middle of part 3, everything moves up by a whole step modulation, and an upwards horn figure is added, all of which contribute to the frantic nature of the battle lasting this long. If the battle continues long enough, eventually the latter section of part 1 will return, creating a musical loop. In addition to the field battle music, there is the strong enemy music, which uses parts of 2 and 3 of field battle with a new introduction. This music plays when you encounter a Lynel in Breath of the Wild. It starts with this banging intro. Literally, it's a lot of banging on piano and drums. As a side note, see how there's no music as Link approaches the Lynel, even as the Lynel sees Link. The music only starts after Link draws his sword. That's some really nice Nintendo polish on the sound design side. This introduction proceeds directly into part 2 of the field battle music. As the battle continues, the music transitions into part 3 of field battle. Sadly, that real cool intro does not return on its own. You'll need to find another Lynel to hear it again. Or you can play Age of Calamity, which uses it a lot, at least in the first level. Although Breath of the Wild has a fair amount of combat music in it already, it would be boring and repetitive if Age of Calamity only used those themes during combat through the whole game. Thus, the composers relegate aspects of field battle and strong enemy to a single level. It's the very first level, in fact, which is called the Battle for Hyrule Field. Using Breath of the Wild's battle music in the very first level seems intentional, as it eases you into the game with a callback to battle in its sister game. When you play Age of Calamity from the beginning, you are thrown into this battle after a long opening cutscene. Perhaps to ease this transition, there's a heroic little intro before the Breath of the Wild battle music commences. Note already the use of piano in the intro, creating an orchestrational continuity between the two games. After this short intro, there is what sounds like a variation on part 1 of the field battle music. The biggest difference is the use of real instruments only, as the staticky sound is missing. Then, without a Lionel in sight, we get the opening of the strong enemy music. Unlike the very short version in Breath of the Wild, this little motif is expanded, repeating several times with strings and brass added. There is then this original part 2, which is more sparsely orchestrated and gives a little bit of reprieve between the otherwise two very aggressive portions. This new part 2 leads into part 3 of the field battle music, which, if it goes on long enough, features the same upwards modulation as in Breath of the Wild. Part 3 of Field Battle and Age of Calamity is very similar to the version in Breath of the Wild, although in general it feels a bit more steady to me. This is likely because the background part stays steady through the modulation, whereas in Breath of the Wild, the background parts are more syncopated and additional pieces are added, creating a less stable foundation for the other parts. As you continue battling in Age of Calamity, eventually the strong enemy intro will return. The music will loop through these 3 sections in this manner, as long as you are fighting weak enemies in the open areas of the level. When battling in an outpost, or when battling a strong enemy, such as a moblin, out in the field, the music utilizes the same 3 parts, but with an added aggressive piano line. And I do mean aggressive. Whatever part of the music is already playing when you enter an outpost or approach a strong enemy in the field will continue with a few changes. Watch, for instance, how the mellower second part of the Battle for Hyrule field music shifts as Link encounters a moblin in the field. Suddenly the piano comes to the foreground, playing a variation on the middle theme that then proceeds into part 3. Part 3 also has an added piano part. As soon as Link kills the moblin, however, the piano disappears and returns to the normal version of Age of Calamity's Part 3, which is the version that is very similar to that in Breath of the Wild. A very similar thing happens when entering an enemy outpost. In this clip, Part 3 is playing when Link enters an enemy outpost, and notice how the piano comes in as he enters. The music then transitions into a more aggressive version of the strong enemy music. The piano is once again jamming out, although notice the underlying strong enemy beat is still present in the other voices. As the battle continues, we proceed into Part 2. Although there is a slight delay, note how the music shifts back to the not outpost version of Part 2 as Link runs between two different outposts, only to switch right back to the outpost version as Link enters a new outpost. That was a lot of time saying outpost. Sorry about that. In this way, the music remains uninterrupted as it moves through the different parts, depending on where you are physically in the level. These changes are subtle enough that if you're not looking for them, you might not notice them at all. Still, subconsciously, you are picking up on the shift in auditory cues to know when the piano part starts jamming out, it is time to get serious. These transitions between the different versions of each part are relatively seamless. The one area where the game does not seem to care about a smooth transition in the music is when you hit the weak point gauge on a strong enemy in an outpost. No matter where the music is, as soon as you hit the weak point gauge, a more brassy orchestration of Part 3 enters. Here are a few examples of this happening. In this case, the game purposely draws attention to the battle shift auditorily with the abrupt change in the music, and visually with the slight slow motion mechanic, alerting the player it's time to really mash those buttons and take down the weak point gauge. Note this only happens in the outposts and not when encountering a strong enemy in the field. Not sure why, this is just how it's set up. So that's most of the music in this level. There is different music at the very end when you fight the moblins as the level's final bosses. This music sounds original to me, at least there was no part of it that stuck out as reused, so I won't bother talking about it in this video. So this is how Age of Calamity incorporates elements of the field battle music and the strong enemy music from Breath of the Wild, with some original flair thrown in. As far as I know, without doing a thorough replay of the game, this is the only level that utilizes these themes. It's not the only level to use memorable battle themes from Breath of the Wild, however, as there are many more such themes when facing off against certain boss-level type enemies. The one I want to talk about next is the Guardian music. The opening frantic piano scramble when Link is spotted by a Guardian in Breath of the Wild should be familiar, especially since it's become a whole meme at this point. But here it is anyways. This opening quickly transitions to a low piano ostinato with a little string motif coming in and out over top of it. Once the Guardian is neutralized, there is a triumphant little fanfare, and the game returns to whatever ambiance or music normally plays in that area of the game. I noticed while writing the script that the Guardian music plays at a slower tempo if the Guardian is stationary, versus if the Guardian has legs to chase you. This is a subtle difference, but the less frantic tempo tells you that the Guardian is less of a threat, since you can more easily run away from it. A version of the Guardian music is used in the Road to the Ancient Lab level in Age of Calamity. The first half of this level features original music with no recurring Zelda theme I recognized. In Road to the Ancient Lab, the Guardian music enters when the party first encounters the Guardian, and it does not stop for the rest of the level. Seriously, you can just be wandering around completely lost with no Guardian in sight, and the piano is still going. This is called Guardian Menace on the Age of Calamity soundtrack. The Guardian Menace music is very similar to the Breath of the Wild Guardian music, with the same frantic piano opening, followed by the ostinato and the occasional string motif. The ostinato section is pretty much the same, except for an additional low string melody that occurs after a few of the little upper string motifs. This happens after the first utterance of the familiar string motif. The second time that motif happens will lead into a new middle section. This added middle section is still heavily reliant on piano, but new to Age of Calamity. This new music has a low piano accompaniment, while the upper piano register plays the closest thing to a melody in this track. It is still very fast, with a lot of notes, but at least to me it sounds more melodic than the rest of the Guardian music. Eventually, the original middle section transitions back to the familiar ostinato from Breath of the Wild. The music loops between the Breath of the Wild Guardian ostinato and the new melody for the remainder of the level. The Breath of the Wild Guardian music is iconic, but it is also very repetitive, which is why I imagine the new section was added in Age of Calamity, since the level is so long. The Road to the Ancient Lab level is the only place the Guardian music seems to be used in Age of Calamity, despite encountering Guardians elsewhere. For example, here is me fighting a Guardian in All Hyrule United, and the level's main music is playing rather than the Guardian music. Online sources say this music occurs in the DLC as well, but I don't own the DLC, so I can't confirm that. Regardless of additional uses, Road to the Ancient Lab is certainly the most prominent usage of this Breath of the Wild theme. So these are a couple of the ways Age of Calamity uses battle themes from Breath of the Wild, changing the orchestration and general context in order to better fit the differences in gameplay. Breath of the Wild also has separate music for each large boss creature, such as the Hinox and the Stone Talus, both themes of which are present in Age of Calamity. But this script was already really long, so I'll save those for another video if people are interested in that. There are so many other musical comparisons to make between Age of Calamity and other Zelda games that I'll probably turn this into a series regardless. I hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a like and subscribe for future videos. Also, if you like the Legend of Zelda games, check out my playthrough of Twilight Princess with my friend Edie, which I will link the playlist here. Language warning on that if that is something that bothers you. And also, if you like this kind of musical analysis, check out the rest of my music analysis videos in the playlist here. As always, thank you so much for watching.